What's up y'all, I'm Murren and I'm Modman. In this series I'll tell you all I know about modding the famous anime games so you can hopefully make your own mod soon. If you haven't, I recommend watching episode 0 where I explain some stuff that I will refer to later in this episode. Anyways, let's get right into it. We'll start with editing a weapon since it's the easiest thing to mod. It has no animations, it's one single object and it doesn't require much tinkering. First we need the dump. You can find most weapons on the repositories in the description. In this case I'll be modding the Sapwood blade. However, this dump is not in the specific repository but can be downloaded using the link in the description. I just have to download the folder and then in Blender I can go to File, Import, 3D me go to Frame Analysis Dump. From there I just have to locate the folder that I downloaded. For me it is in Weapons and in this case the Sapwood blade. As you can see it has txt files, which is what we need to select, and then click the blue button and the weapon will be in our screen. However, it is still a dual gray. We can fix this. First, in your Explorer, find the place where you downloaded the weapon and select the Sapwood blade head diffuse file, or if you're using another weapon, head diffuse.dds. You can open this with paint.net like I will, and with some plugins you can also use it in Photoshop. Because now the alpha values are a bit faded, I can go to Effects, Alpha Mask, which is a plugin I have installed, and the texture becomes fully visible. I can now click Ctrl-Shift-S, allowing me to save it in a different location, and I'll just save it over here as a PNG, and click Save. The settings don't really matter, and we will have a version of the texture saved where everything is visible. Now, back in Blender, we can load this texture by going to the Shading tab all the way in the top, and then under here there is a way to edit the material. We first have to add a material by clicking the plus, adding a new material with these screens which are called nodes, in this case a principled BDSF node and a material output node. To route the image into this, we can click Shift A and click Texture, Image Texture. Shift A allows us to add different nodes to this screen. As you can see, we can now add or open an image and we have the color output. We can drag this color output into the base color input of the BSDF node. This will make it so that the color that is outputted by the image that we will add will be displayed on the weapon. Now here in the image texture node we can click open, we can locate the file that we just saved, and as you can see the weapon now has its colors back. However, if you would go back to layout tab, the first tab, you would see that it is a dual gray again. This is because we are now in a different viewing mode. We can fix this by going all the way to the top right where you have 4 little balls, and clicking the third one will display the textures. Before I'm gonna talk about the weapon, I'll explain how you can move around your camera in Blender. This is important since struggling with rotating or moving your camera just right will only work against you. The main way to move yourself around is your middle mouse button, your scroll wheel. Most mice will allow you to press this, and holding this and moving your mouse around will allow you to pan your camera. Holding shift while moving your mouse around will move your mouse perpendicular to the camera view, basically dragging your view across your screen. Holding control and middle mouse button will allow you to zoom easily. Moving your mouse up will zoom in, moving your mouse down will zoom out. Take some time to get familiar with this since it will speed up your modding considerably. As I explained in episode 0, there's also a few tabs we're gonna use. Most likely you're currently watching the layout tab. This is the first tab and can also be called object mode. In object mode you can see each individual object. Right now we only have one, but we can have a very large amount of them in our scene. In the bottom right you can see that there's a list with various icons. These all allow us to do separate stuff to our objects. For example, adding modifiers. Modifiers are quite important since they can be used to very quickly do stuff that otherwise would take a long time to do manually. Adding a modifier, in this case for example the mirror modifier, will show these 4 little buttons on the top. These allow us to change where we can see the effects of the modifier. The first button is a little triangle. If we enable this, then you will see that in edit mode, the mirrored vertices of the mirror modifier will be visible. However, if we turn this off, then only the original vertices will be visible. The second is a little square, which is basically allowing us to toggle if the mirroring or the entire modifier is visible in edit mode. The third one is the real time, which basically allows us to disable it in other modes like layout and sculpting. And the last one is render. This is only when you're gonna make animations in Blender, but because we are not doing this, we can leave this alone. It is useful to know what these buttons do, since sometimes you want to hide or show a specific modifier in a different way. Modifiers that we will use a lot are subdivision surface, mirror, and some others. However, for now we can just leave them alone since it's just a weapon. Subdivision modifiers will allow you to create more detail to the object by increasing the amount of vertices. To explain vertices, let's head over to the modeling tab, which is the second tab in the top. This is also called edit mode, as you can see in the top left, and this allows us to edit the specific points that the model is made up of. As you can see, there's all kinds of little dots around here that are currently selected, and these make up the structure of the model. In edit mode, we can look at our model in 3 different ways. You can change this all the way in the top left. We are now currently in vertex select, which is a square with a little white square in it. This means that we can select the individual points that the model was made up of. Next to that is edge select, which allows us to select the different edges that the models make up of. Edges are basically lines drawn between 2 vertices. And the third mode is face select mode, which allows us to select faces, which are made up of 3 or more lines that are connected to each other. The different modes allow us to perform different actions. I will explain the actions when I use them, since once again it's a lot of buttons to go through. In each of these modes, you can edit the selected parts, whether that be vertices, edges, or faces. We can scale them, which usually only applies to faces. As you can see, we can scale individual faces, but we can also move them around, rotate them in a specific way, and we can all do that on different levels by either selecting individual vertices or whole groups of faces. To explain the moving and rotating a bit, I will get a little closer, which I can also do by pressing the period key on the numpad, which will center my viewport around the selected part. As you can see, for example, moving has 3 colored arrows, 3 colored squares, and 1 white circle. These all indicate different axes. Basically, 3-dimensional, as we are working in right now, means that there are 3 axes that stuff can be made up in. If something would be 2-dimensional, it would only have 2 axes. These axes are vertical, horizontal, and perpendicular to both of those. As you can see, the blue arrow is vertical. You can move it up or down. The green arrow is 1 horizontal, which can move it from left to right, and the red arrow is from front to back. The little squares allow us to move stuff across 2 axes. The blue square will allow us to move stuff fully horizontally in a plane, but it will never go up and down. The same goes for the green square, which will allow us to move it in every direction except for the green arrow, so horizontal. Then you have lastly the white circle, and grabbing this will allow us to move the selected parts perpendicular to the camera. Edit mode is most useful for removing or adding parts of the mesh or making very specific edits. However, to edit large parts of the model, edit mode would not be the best way. For that we have another tab, which is sculpting. In sculpting, you can see on the left there is a huge list of different sculpting tools. Some of these are more useful than others, but it takes very long to get familiar with all of them. I recommend taking the time to just play around with them on a cube that is subdivided and see what tool does what. If I use any of them, I will explain their function. So let's start with removing the leaf. To remove or add parts of the model, edit mode is the most suited. If we select a vertex here, I can press numpad, in case you're very much zoomed out, and it will immediately zoom in to the handle, which allows us to make more specific edits. If I press L while hovering my mouse over a specific vertex, it will select all connected vertices. As you can see, the leaf is one group of vertices that is directly connected to each other. However, it is not directly connected to the handle. I can change it to certain modes in the bottom here, but the default is fine for now. It selects the part since it's an individual group of vertices, because as you can see, if I move this away, the rest of the model stays the same. If I would move a group of vertices that is connected to the rest of the model, as you can see, the model was scratched to still be connected to it. So by pressing L, I can select the entire leaf around the handle and the little leaf as well. And by pressing delete, I get a pop-up menu in what way I want to delete this. The most useful way to understand this is only looking at the top 5. Deleting vertices will delete every single selected point. Deleting edges will select any edges, and if a point will not have any edges to it, then it will delete the point as well. However, if a point has another edge that is not selected, the point will still exist. The same goes for faces. However, if an edge or point still can exist because another face is connected to it, then it will still keep existing. For now, we can just safely delete all vertices to remove the leaf around the handle. And I seem to have missed selecting part of the leaf, so I will remove that as well. Now that we removed the little leaf around the handle, you can see that we created a new hole. We can fill this up in multiple ways, but because it's such a spiraling shape, which is not the easiest way to fix, the best way to do this is going in edge mode and just start on the beginning of the hole and select 2 faces, one on the one side of the hole and one on the other, and pressing F. This will basically fill in the space between the 2 edges by connecting them on the ends. I can just do this for the entire hole by simply selecting the 2 edges and filling them. As you can see, selecting the wrong edge might create very weird shapes, so make sure you select the proper edges. And just like that, the hole is filled. However, as you can see, the faces here are square, or well, at least have 4 corners, while the rest of the model has triangular faces. And we can very easily fix this by just pressing A, right mouse button, and click Triangulate Faces. Pressing A will select the entire model, any face, vertex, and edge that is existing. Triangulating will automatically make every non-triangular shape a triangular one. Triangles are better to have in your models usually because having faces of multiple corners can create really weird shapes. Making it triangles will allow you to better guide Blender to what shape you want to have. Now the leaf around the handle is gone, we can start changing the shape of the blade. However, to do that, sculpting would be way more suitable. But as you might have noticed, the blade is made up out of different groups that are all not connected to each other. This might produce very weird results in sculpting. As you can see, it might create holes in the blade or very sharp corners. We can prevent this by merging all identical vertices. Before I explain what it does, I'll show you how you do it. First off, you will have to select the entire part of the blade that you want to merge vertices in. However, just selecting from one side will make you miss the bottom. The easiest way to fix this is by going to the top right here and pressing the 2 little squares. This toggles X-ray mode. X-ray mode basically allows you to see through everything, even other objects, and when selecting stuff you will see that it selects everything. I'll just select the part of the blade that I want to merge vertices in, and when I've done that, I can press M, which is a hotkey for merge, and I can click by distance. On the bottom left here, you see 3 options: sharp edges, unselected, and a merge distance. First off, sharp edges. Basically what this does is if you merge 2 vertices that have a very sharp corner between each other, selecting this will mark those very sharp edges by making them blue, which will tell Blender to keep those edges sharp and not round them off. Second off, it's unselected. If I would tick this, then it would merge all vertices by distance of the entire model and not just what I selected, so I want to keep this off. Then we have the merge distance. This is basically how far we allow vertices to be from each other to be merged. I have it on a very low increment right now, which basically makes it so that only the vertices that are on exactly the same spot will get merged. However, increasing this distance will merge by a bigger increment, as you can see. I'll just leave this on the lowest possible increment, so only identical vertices will be merged. And now we are ready to sculpt. However, do make sure that you check if your model is still fine, since merging vertices can cause some issues. As you can see now, the edge is still sharp, but that doesn't always have to be the case. Now, since the vertices are merged, we are ready to sculpt. In this case, because I mostly want the blade to be curvier, I want to like drag it around a bit. I can do this using elastic deform, which basically allows me to, well, deform the blade. For every tool, there are two ways to change its behavior. The first one is pressing right mouse button, which will open a little pop-up where you can change the radius, basically how big the effect is, the strength, which will change the inner circle, which shows how strong the effect is. And every tool has its own other options, but depending on the tool. In this case, we'll leave them alone. Another important thing to note is in the bottom right, you can change every tool in a way more detailed way. This allows you to customize a tool to do exactly what you want. However, you will need a deeper understanding of how the tool works in itself. Another thing that is very important while sculpting is that sculpting always works either in the same axis as your camera or perpendicular to it. As you can see right now, dragging the point of this while looking like this will only move it in a perpendicular way to my camera, while, for example, inflating will only move it towards my view. To make sure that your sculpting only does exactly what you want it to, you can either lock certain axes, or what is easier is just in the ball in the top right here, selecting Z, and now I see a top-down view, and it will only sculpt perpendicular to my view, so in a flat way. However, if I were to sculpt now, the blade will get deformed the wrong way. This is because my sculpting will only have effect on the top of the blade and not on the bottom. A way to fix this is mirrored editing. As you can see in the top right here, there's an X, Y, and Z representing the different axes. The little butterfly next to it basically indicates mirroring. If I would, for example, select X right now, you will see that not on just one side, but also on the other side of the X, on the other side of the X-axis, there will appear another small dot, which indicates that not just on the place that I point my mouse at, the sculpting will have effect, but also on the other side of the axis. In this case, I want my sculpting to have effect on both the top and the bottom of the blade, so I want to have it around the Y-axis, which is from here to here. And as you can see, now the top and bottom of my blade both gets affected by my sculpting. So, changing my view, I can now start actually sculpting. I do this by pressing left mouse button to make my sculpting start having effect and dragging around. As you can see, I can now elastically move around any part that I grabbed, because that is what this tool does. I will zoom in a bit since I think the radius is a bit too heavy right now, and I can just start moving the tip and the middle of the blade around a bit so it gets a more curvier shape. Once I am satisfied with the end result of this shape, which will be right now, I need to note that I don't just want it to be more curvier, I also want the blade to be broader. A simple way to do this is using another tool called inflate or layer, but in this case I'll use inflate. Again, I only want it to have effect to the sides and not to the top or the bottom. So I can change my viewport to be just the side, change my radius to be a little bit smaller, and I can just drag it along the blade. And if I change my viewport now, you might have seen that it got a little broader. However, it doesn't really go that quickly. I can change this by making the strength a little bit higher. So I'll drag along, and as you can see, the blade gets stronger. Well, stronger, broader. I can do this on both sides, so I'll do this on the other side as well. However, unfortunately, the inflate tool will also cause the blade to get thicker, which is not what I want. So, once I think the blade is broad enough, I want it to get a little smaller again. Thinner. I can do this by using the flattening tool, which basically, well, flattens stuff. So by going from top down, I can start dragging the flattening tool along the blade, and because it's mirrored, it will flatten the blade very aggressively. Luckily, flattening is one of the tools that does not depend on the angle of your camera, so I can take a more diagonal look to actually see the direct effects of my sculpting. So now the blade is a little bit thinner where I want it to be thinner, and it's also broader and curvier, which is exactly what I wanted. Now we finished the model of the sword, we have to check if our UV maps are still proper. UV maps are basically maps for the computer to know what part of a texture file should have effect on what part of the model. Every face of the model is linked to a face on the UV map, however, edges and vertices can appear multiple times of the UV map. So let's head over to UV editing, and we don't see much. The reason why is because currently it only displays the selected vertices. So let's press A in the right side, and as you can see, suddenly the UV map appears. Every single face of the model will also have a face linked to it here on the UV map, and we can individually select vertices here. Once again, like in edit mode, we can change our selection to be vertex mode, edge mode, edge mode, face mode, but also island selection mode. Island selection will basically select every connected part, basically like the L tool in edit mode. However, this is not the only way to edit the UV map, since, well, this is very useful because we can also select very specific parts of the model on the right and edit them on the left. We can also go into deeper detail by pressing the little two arrows here in the top left. This is called UV sync selection. Basically what this means is that whatever is selected on the right will also be selected on the left, and vice versa. So selecting a vertex in the UV map will also select that specific vertex in edit mode, but also the other way around. This can be very useful for selecting specific parts. As you can see, selecting this specific vertex will select two vertices on the UV map. This is what I meant with one vertex having multiple vertices on the UV map. However, faces will always have only one link. An important thing to note is that the UV map can become really weird when you do specific actions, especially in edit mode. I recommend regularly checking on the UV map to avoid encountering a whole colonial war after hours of work. The UV map is looking fine, we didn't tinker too much, and what was there already is still there. So I think we can leave this alone and go ahead and start texturing. There are two ways to texture your model, and the first way to do this is going to texturing right inside of Blender. We can do this by going to the texture paint file, and like in UV mode, we will have two screens. On the right there's the model, and on the left there is direct texture. This mode is very useful to draw specific stuff on the model. For example, let's say I really want a little smiley to be on the blade. It is easier to do that right here because I can directly choose where on the blade it will appear. So like this. Because as you can see, the texture might be a bit warped in the texture file. For example, I want this handle to be smoother, one color. Or maybe just delete those black lines. On the left, I can select the color tab, which is basically a color picker, so I can select any color that I want in either RGB, HSV, and hex, which are different ways to represent a color. However, I can also take this little eyedropper and sample a color from the texture. An important thing to note is that it samples a color from the screen directly. So selecting a color here, as you can see, will display the faint gray that this light generates. So usually when you use the eyedropper, I recommend only eyedropping inside of the texture file. Now that we did this, I can use the right mouse button again to change the radius and strength of my brush. I'll turn the radius down a bit and I'll just color over the black lines that I want to be gone. Of course, the colors vary a bit here, so I'll have to regularly do the eyedropping tool again. Once again, this is something that just takes a little bit of time to get familiar with. And like with other things, I will recommend you to just play around with it yourself. Just watching these tutorials will not be enough to make you an insane modder, and you will just have to practice, and doing that will make you see progress much faster. Okay, now I have textured away the lines that were there from the leaves, and as you can see, I can check directly on the model what the result is, and I think it looks pretty fine. However, this will not directly save the image that we edited, so we want to make sure that we can keep those changes. The easiest way to do is by going to the top left and selecting image and save. This will save to the location that we pulled the image from. However, we can also do image and save as to save it on a new location. However, to texture the blade in a different program, like for example Photoshop, we will have to export the blade first so we can directly change the texture. Exporting is actually very straightforward. The only thing that you need to very much make sure of is that modifiers are all applied and that you only have one object that has this name. For example, when we imported the model, there was only one object that was called Sapwood blade head and there were no other objects. If you would have objects with different names, they will not be exported. Or if this object now has a different name, then it will not be exported either. That is a thing to make sure of. Then exporting is basically just pressing File and export Genshin mods folder. Then we have to locate the folder where we initially imported the model from, which in my case is weapons, Sapwood blade. As you might know, this is also where the txt files are. The name doesn't matter for now, but if you really want to, you can just put something there. And you must make sure that it is the proper folder, otherwise your exporting will give an error. Then we just have to click the blue button and we have to wait for a bit, and then you will see wrote this many indices to the proper location. Now that the model is actually exported, we can directly load this into the game. If we locate the directory where our Sapwood blade was, we can see that there's actually a generated Sapwood blade mod folder. What is even crazier is that this folder is already a working mod, which is just generated for us. As you can see, it has all the files that are required that you saw in episode 0. So just copying this specific file, not cutting it, I wanted to stay there. Just simply copying this and then going over to your mods folder and pasting it will allow you to load it in game. So if we now go back to Genshin and press F10, then my Genshin will lag for a few seconds, and as you can see, it's successfully loaded. So then I can go to my character screen, weapons, and as you can see, the new shape of the blade is in game and the leaves are gone. However, the texture is of course still not edited, since we still have to add that into our current mod. So, to texture the weapon in a different program, we can of course open it in paint.net, which is my favorite way. There are a lot of people who frown upon that and really say that you should use Photoshop. I just don't like Photoshop. So I can open Sapwood blade head diffuse, and this time I should not apply the alpha mask because the alpha values are important. Basically, the higher an alpha value is, basically how faint the color is, decides the emission. So making this full alpha would make the entire blade glow, which is not what I want. So I can go to adjustments, invert alpha, and show the texture that should not be emitted at all. The only part of the texture that I edited is the top left here. So if I would locate the edit the texture that we loaded into Blender, as you can see where those lines are gone, I can select the relevant part and I can just paste it over here, and the fixed version will be there with no issues at all because they are the same size and pretty much the same file. However, I don't just want to edit this, I also want to change the hue of the weapon because I want it to match with Bennett, so I want it to be white and red. This is why I love using paint.net, because there's an incredibly easy way to do that. However, first, a little trick is check the UV map. We deleted something, so this green parts don't have to be edited anymore because they don't exist on the model anymore. So I can leave those alone, and I can just take my magic wand and start selecting the green parts of the model that I want to be turned red. In Paint.net, you can, if you have selected everything that you want to recolor, do a very neat trick in adjustment, use saturation. This will basically allow you to change whatever you have selected to any color that you want. So if I would go to hue right now, this is basically the base color, and I can change this to any color of the rainbow. So I'll move it until it's like a bit reddish, which is what I want to achieve. Then we have saturation, which is basically how deep the color is. So moving this down will make it more gray, moving this up will make it more red in this case, which is basically also the hue that we selected. So moving this up a bit because I want a deeper red, and then lightness moving down so it gets a bit darker or lighter if you prefer that. You can basically achieve any color you want by playing around with this. So once I am satisfied, I can just press OK and the changes are applied. Now to change the rest of the model, of course, I don't want to start selecting all of that again, because doing something else while having this selected will also change this. So the easiest way to do that is select these parts as well, which is what I don't want to change either. And once we have selected that as well, we only have to click one shortcut, and that is Ctrl and I. This inverts the selection, so now everything is selected except for the parts that we don't want to change. Then I can go into adjustments again, use saturation, and I can change the color of this to anything I want as well. So I'll change the hue to like a more, well, like 0 would make it brown again, but I'll just change it to a more, let's say reddish again. And then I'll move the saturation down a lot, so it becomes way grayer and barely has any color in it anymore. And then I can move the lightness up a lot until it becomes white. Of course, I don't want it to be full white, so maybe dosing, playing around with this a bit will allow me to still have it white, but still have the definitions that were in the original texture. So once I have done this and decided what I want to do, let's put it a little bit like this. I can just press OK and the changes are saved. Now the last thing that I want to do is make this a little bit more red. So once again, I can change this as well, select it. And once that all is selected, I can just go ahead and go to adjustments, use saturation again, and make it a little deeper red. And I think that's done. However, as you can see, it's a little bit jaggy here because of the way that we made the selections. A simple way to change that is basically selecting around this part and selecting all the parts that I want to be less jaggy. And now I can do a very simple thing, which is affect blurs. And I'll do, wrong button. I'll do fragment, I think, and then turn the distance down to only 1 pixel. And the fragment count to, yeah, that's fine. And as you can see, it already fades more. And one more thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do some Gaussian blur so the colors fade even more. And as you can see now, there are less jaggy lines. All I have to do now is make sure to invert the alpha again, because of course we want the emission to stay the same, otherwise the entire weapon will be glowing. And we can just save it. However, with saving DDS files, you need to watch out for a few important things. First off, press Ctrl S. There will be a screen where there will be multiple buttons you can choose from. The first important one is the settings. It might be on a different setting. For your optimal performance, use BC7 DX11 and sRGB. Linear is not the way to go, so just select sRGB BC7 DX11. That is very important for the diffuse files. Error metric is your own choice. I prefer perceptual. Your compression speed should either be slow or medium, otherwise you'll lose quality. And make sure you use generate mip maps. Basically, generating mip maps allows the game to create smaller versions of your texture, so that even when people are on lower graphic settings, your texture will still be displayed properly. And that's basically it. Now you can just press OK and it will save your texture. And all you have to do now is go back into here, press F10, and the new texture will load. After a bit of lag, of course. I am happy with the result, and I hope you are too with the result of your weapon mod. So yeah, now my weapon matches Bennett. And that wraps it up for this video. I covered the process of importing a weapon, making some simple weapon edits, and 2 ways to texture your models. I also explained how to export a mod and what to look for when saving your textures. I hope your weapon mod works, and while you wait for the next video, try making another weapon mod yourself. They're pretty doable and you can do very fun things with them if you get a bit creative. If you have any questions about modding, you can join the AGMMG Discord if you haven't already. It's a fun server with lots of people who are very helpful if you have questions, and the link will be in the description for that. In the next video, I'll cover our first character mod. This will be a bit more complex than a weapon mod, but I'll try my best to make it easy enough for everyone to understand. Thanks for watching and see you next time.